You are listening to Hello Talent.
Hello, talent. This is Frank.
And I'm Mac.
Hello, I'm Fusawa.
Hello, talent. I'm Jamie. I'm Sarah.
Hello, talent. I'm Nora.
I'm Akane.
You are listening to Hello Talent.
Hello, talent.
Hello, talent. Enjoy.
You're listening to
Hello,
Talent.
Good afternoon again. Now I'm joined here with
Florence.
Happy to see you, Florence.
Happy to see you too.
And let's just get deep into the questions. Now, from your experience in analyzing economic developments in Asia, how do you see industrial upgrading contributing to the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDG, particularly those related to sustainable industry and economic growth?
And I'm quite optimistic about that. I know you're students of finance and not of economics, but as you know, in economics we use what we call the Kuznets environmental curve, and that means that once a country starts to develop and goes from agriculture into industrialization, that you get more polluting, that you get more dirty. But once you grow economically, you move more towards the service industry, you do less manufacturing, but also the manufacturing becomes cleaner. So you see that the pollution is getting diminished after a country develops increasingly. I think it also takes, of course, money to clean up your economy. If you maybe think about, for example, Indonesia or Thailand, we see that many farmers do slash and burn because it's too expensive to clean the fields in a proper way. If a government has more money, it can subsidize the farmers to do this in a more clean way, as we do in Europe, for example. So, in general, with, let's say, better technologies and, of course, high economic growth in Asia, higher than in other parts of the world, if we look at the longer term, I do think that Asian countries, both Northeast Asia, China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia, the ASEAN countries and Indonesia, will, because of further economic development, do more industrial upgrading and thus have cleaner technologies and cleaner societies.
So, as you see, like, electricity is like a very important part of the world. Everything is using electricity. So, do you think, like, what's the most promising renewable energy today? Like, how close are they to large-scale implementation? For example, like solar energy, wind energy, or hydropower, like that.
I think it depends very much on your location and your natural or geographic location in the world. If we look, for example, at the map of Europe, we see that the most northern countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, they have a lot of hydro energy because they have mountains and water. If you look at my country, it's totally flat. There's no mountain, not a single mountain. So you cannot have hydro energy. We have a lot of wind. So we have a lot of wind energy, wind parks, both on the land but also on the sea. And if you look then, for example, at a country like Spain, or we can also say Morocco, which is then outside of Europe, they are in a very good location, although they're not in the tropical zone, for solar energy. So Spain has now, for the largest part, when it comes to renewables, solar energy. Our country, wind energy. The Nordic countries, hydro energy. So I do think in the future that every country has to look at the optimal use of different resources. And for Taiwan and for example, Japan, that can also be geothermic types of energy systems. So I think it should be tailor-made and you should lose. It will no longer be like we did it before, that we all use oil or gas. We will look more at our own best circumstances.
Now, having worked extensively on sustainability and technology transfer, what do you think are the biggest barriers for companies in Asia and Europe when integrating ESG principles into their operations?
Yeah. Of course, ESG principles are broader than only, let's say, environmental sustainability. Yes. It also pertains to, for example, social sustainability. Maybe for the moment, focus on the environment, but if you wish, we can also talk about social sustainability. I think that the key to the transition of becoming more sustainable or carbon neutral is in financing the transition. Not all companies have equal access to bank funding, loans from banking or from the stock market to make this transition. So at the moment, in general, I think there is many technologies available, but not all the companies do have the awareness about the technologies available, or they do not have the capital to finance the transition to use these new technologies. And the gap at the moment is becoming bigger. The technologies are increasing very rapidly because we have very strong researchers around the globe. But the companies cannot catch up, partly because they don't have the knowledge in the companies, and partly because they do not have the finance to make the transition.
So can the government do more to support
I
these
think that government policies, and we also discussed this a bit before when it comes to industrial policies, are crucial. So in any economy, of course, the government is the unit that transfers finance from one group to another. So you have a taxation system, the companies pay taxes, high income people pay taxes, and you transfer that, for example, to retired people or to people with a handicap. Now, when it comes to this transition towards a carbon neutral society, definitely governments have to see that those who need it to make the transition also get access to the finances to make that transition. What I see happening is, of course, that in many countries, the energy suppliers, the energy companies are state-owned enterprises, often, not always. So there it's happening already. But we see that, for example, in public transportation in some countries, it's also led by the state. So if we look at, for example, the national railways in my country, and again, the Netherlands is a very small country, there the national railway system uses 100% renewable energy. So all the trains are running on wind and solar energy. In other countries, they do that differently again. But I think if the state is more involved, you can make the transition more speedy or more quicker than if you don't involve the state.
Next, moving on, like, as you know, like people always marketing like green technology, better future, stuff like that. But is there any like hidden environmental costs of emerging green technologies, and how do we mitigate them?
I think there is, of course, still a lot of greenwashing going on. We should also be open and honest with ourselves and say that all these things are relatively new. Of course, there was criticism in the 1960s and 1970s, including here in Taiwan, that the environment was too much polluted, the air, the soil, the water. And we have tried to clean up and do things better. But now we're talking about totally sustainable and green supply chains. Now, if you look, for example, at the clothes you're wearing, or maybe the makeup you're using, or the other appliances that we have here around us, there's still not a good labeling system to see how things are made. Are they made environmental friendly? Are they reusable? Are they made also socially in a proper way? So I think there we have to make big steps in making these things more transparent. But that will take more time. I see that some of, for example, the clothes makers are now trying to do that. Brands like Patagonia and other brands, they really are clear about that. But more established brands are not so open about that yet. But I also see that younger people put more pressure on companies to do so. So I think that in the future, this will become a better system where you can really make the proper choices. But I also think that governments will steer our consumers in certain directions by, for example, introducing certain taxes. If I may give one example, in my country, for example, we are now going to introduce a sugar tax because people become too obese. They eat too much, they drink too many soft drinks, so they make the price higher by a tax, and then we will lower the tax or maybe abolish the tax for vegetables and fruits. So a government can do things to smoothen that transition towards more sustainable lifestyles.
You talked about being sustainable, but what if we go all in on sustainability, right? And a lot of poorer countries, less fortunate countries, they always claim that they need fossil fuels to survive. They can't survive on wind energy, and that they feel, they believe that this is just the North recolonizing them by telling them what to do, and that they won't get any richer if the Western countries or Northern countries just keep on, the global North just keep on telling them what to do, and they feel like they need these natural resources to survive.
Yeah.
And what is it if they listened and they listen to the global north,
Yeah.
but at the same time, because they go all in to make sure that everything is clean, everything is green, that they also forget that humans need quality
Yeah.
of life,
Yeah.
which is also important.
Yeah.
How do we balance this, quality of life or the environment or the planet?
Yeah. Extremely difficult question that you're asking me
Yeah.
next. But I think that goes both for developed and developing nations, how you share the burden within countries, between countries, and also between the global north and the global south. I do recognize the discussion of the north recolonizing the south. I don't think that is so much the intention, but I do think that still, if you look at United Nations and other organizations, that a limited number of people, let's say 1 billion from Europe and the US together, do try to dominate the world when it comes to many choices. I fully agree there with you. By the way, that awareness is not so much present in Europe or the US. They find it totally normal to do so, but there's also people who are critical about it. I think the last conference in Azerbaijan, of course, talked about huge transfers of billions of dollars after 2035, if I say the right year, where you should help the northern countries, the southern countries, in making the transition. And I think that people in the north do not realize sufficiently how the living circumstances in developing countries are. Of course, we see sometimes films or documentaries or pictures of extremely poor people, but the realization also how difficult the life is for often middle-class people in many developing countries is not there so much in the West. So that you cannot, let's say, spend 20 or 25% of your income on energy as you are, let's say, a low-income earner in Indonesia or Malaysia or whatever country we name now. I think on a slightly different account, that north-south dichotomy is also getting smaller because China and India are becoming so important. And I'm not sure if you then would think of China as being part of the north or of the south. But I do think that China realized very much that for its further economic development, they cannot rely only on the United States or in Europe.
Yeah.
So they're looking to Central Asia, Southeast Asia, but also to Africa and Latin America. And I think India is going even one step further. I mean, if you look at Chinese economic development, they invited many Western companies in the 80s and 90s and 2000s to produce in China and to find the technologies and to build up on that. India is different. They don't invite so much the Western companies. They immediately look at Middle Eastern companies, Middle Eastern countries, Southeast Asian countries, African countries, and Latin American countries. They don't want to have their growth dependent on the US and Europe because they don't trust them. So I think this North-South dichotomy is still there, and you can see it in international conferences. On the other hand, if you look at statistics of the growth of South-South trade, that's going much quicker than North-South trade. Because, let's say, the American and European economy are not growing that much any longer. They're very mature.
Yeah.
Whereas many
Southern
economies
yes.
are growing much quicker.
Yes.
So also the increase in their mutual trade is going quicker.
So
I will not throw in too many numbers, but for example, in the 1950s, so let's say 70 years ago,
Yes.
the American economy was more than half of the world's economy. And now it has gone to below 20%.
Yes.
So the relative importance of the northern economies is not as prominent as it was before.
So you're saying that it used to be north and south, but now it's kind of like south and south cannibalizing each other.
Yeah, maybe not cannibalizing, but also helping each other.
Helping each other.
Yes.
Sharing and
Yes. Yes.
hopefully
Yes.
innovating together.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And maybe one additional point is here. Of course, if you look at Chinese infrastructure, comes at much lower prices than Japanese or Western infrastructure. So suppose an African country wants to make a railway. If you ask a German company to do that, or a Japanese company, it will be triple the cost of a Chinese
Yes.
company. So I think there's also a natural reason for many countries to look more at China and at India. because they have good technologies at relatively good prices. Maybe, as we discussed before, the difference between a BYD and a Tesla car. So I think the South-South trade and investment will continue to flourish.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
Yeah. So Max, do you still remember when we were freshmen, like in the winter?
Yeah.
Like it used to be so cold in the mid-December.
Yes.
Now this year, it was so hot outside currently. So, like many countries and governments out there, like they're still contemplating, like, should we invest more in mitigating climate change effect, like adaptation, or like in preventing it altogether, like the mitigation, and given the uncertainty outcomes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it should be a mix.
A mix.
In the sense that the climate is changing.
Yes.
And even if we stop burning all fossils today, the climate will still change. It will not stop immediately.
Yes.
As you've seen with the Paris Agreement and all sorts of research that has been done, even if we limit the growth of carbon, or if we decarbonize by 2050, it will not become colder again. That's not the expectation. So on the one hand, yes, I think we should all together, both North and South, try to decarbonize as far as possible.
Yes.
And I agree that the North should help the South more there without setting too many conditions. And at the same time, I think, yes, we should mitigate the problems and see that those people who are affected most are also being helped.
Yes.
Because if, of course, water levels are rising, and if Jakarta is sinking into the sea, we should do something for the fishermen and for other people. And the same goes, in particular, I think, for underprivileged people, that they need help to survive the climate change.
What are I'm actually curious now because we have carbon capture and this technology. It's not mature yet. What are your thoughts on this? Final take. Before we end this session.
I'm not a technological person, but I do think it will help. There is different ideas about the pros and cons about storing the carbon dioxide, for example, below the sea. So I don't have a strong idea about that, but that it might be a temporary solution. I think I agree, because if we continue to see the increases in CO2 emissions as they go now, we're going the wrong way. So this might probably one of the solutions, but here again, I think it should be a policy mix of capturing CO2, bringing the systems down, but also, and I think that is the most difficult part of it, change the behavior. I think what we see now in Europe, at least, is that people don't want to eat less meat. People don't want to fly less. People don't want to drive the cars less. People don't want less things in their house. So we are now constantly, I think, continuously struggling to make all these things cleaner and more sustainable. Whereas it also might be an option, of course, to consume a bit less meat, maybe indeed postpone buying a new iPhone by 2 or 3 or 4 years, and not every second year a new one. But I think what is the most difficult thing for people is to change your behavior.
What is your advice if you were to give someone who started a career in ESG?
Okay. Now, let me say I'm very happy by all the questions that you prepared and the thoroughness of your questions and the awareness that you have for these problems, because I think there's where it starts. If people are ignorant or don't know about all the environmental problems and the sustainability problems, they can also not act. And I do think when educational systems are not good and people don't have access to proper education, that they don't know what they are doing when they throw plastic into the sewage system or into the rivers. So it all starts for me with educating people, both formal and informally. And once that consciousness is there, more widely spread, and I think that many countries are now successful in awareness campaigns all over the world, then I think that there might also be a sort of multiplier effect, and that we can implement the ESGs much quicker than we do now. And yes, for you as leaders of the future, having good university education, I think you are a sort of change agents, and you will talk to your families, to your companies that you will work in the future, and you will be more knowledgeable than people of my age about all the different technologies that are there. So I'm quite hopeful that the next generation will do better, maybe, when it comes to all these things than my generation has done.
Hopefully.
I think so. Yeah.
Professor, that was such an impactful insight
Yes.
that you've given us. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so
We
much.
appreciate your
Yes.
time, and we'll see you again hopefully next year.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right then. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Busser.
Thank you,
Thank
Max.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are your ears hot?
Yeah, it's so
Yeah,
hot.
that's
I'm
from the-
sweating right now.
Can't believe I held that for like 1 hour.